Philadelphia Flyers continue to overcome adversity and to surprise a lot of people by winning more hockey games. Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers is here to tell us how they do it and also what to expect as the trade deadline approaches. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. No, your eyes are not deceiving you. It is not Friday. It is Monday, but my Friday co-host, Rachel Donner, the co-host of Locked On Flyers, is here to talk a little Flyers. And Rachel, 3 wins in a row. The Flyers keep finding ways to win.
Yeah, it's been interesting because they had a rough patch leading up to the All-Star break, and it was really important to come back strong. And they were able to do so this past week against Florida, against Winnipeg, and then over the weekend against Seattle. And they won in very different ways. And the game against Florida was the first game back for both teams. They were sloppy to some degree, but the Flyers found a way to win. And they then in the next game against Winnipeg had a tremendous first period, going up 3-0, and then played pretty lousy for the rest of the game. But Winnipeg just wasn't able to get it together either. So, and then played just a solid game across the board, I think, against Seattle. So they're finding different ways to win, I think, in these games. And I think I may have mentioned this before on the Monday show here, but the Flyers are doing something different this year, and that the resiliency has been there all season long. They don't give up on any game. And more importantly, I think they don't play to the level of the competition. They play their game every single day, game in and game out. And I think that makes a huge difference, and that it keeps the consistency and that resiliency going.
You talk about consistency. Let's talk about John Tortorella and the job that he's done this year with this team.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting to watch because, there are generalized concerns about him as a coach out there in terms of him working players too hard and draining them physically so they can't last through a season. His defense is very block shot oriented, and he hasn't been able to develop young players well. I think those are the top critiques of him as a coach. And with the Flyers, I think he's pushed past 1.5 of those things. I think that the way he's helped motivate this team and make this team want to play for each other, and play that kind of intensity, they want to do it. And I think he's been successful there. I think he's still struggling in terms of integrating more of the younger players more often. Igor Zamula is only getting in really when it's an 11-7 setup and not a 12-6, to some degree. And I don't know that I like that. But he's managed to also kind of mix up the defensive structure and not rely entirely on block shots for every game. He uses it strategically, which I know, shocking, but but I think he's being really smart about it now. And of course, bringing in Brad Shaw and the power kill with the Flyers has been just a huge addition this year to them being able to execute.
Let's talk about special teams. The power play next to last in the league, the penalty kill second best in the league. What's going on?
Well, the aforementioned Brad Shaw and the power kill is what's driving the penalty kill. I believe the Flyers have the best net penalty kill because they're scoring a ton of shorthanded goals. Ryan Poehling had 2 shorties this week as well. So I think that's a huge part of what's going on there, and that the penalty kill has a new life this year, and adding Travis Konechny to the mix in the penalty kill has been a huge part of it. He's a really strong element there. Power play, that is another question. In this last game against Seattle, I talked about it a little more extensively on Monday's Locked On Flyers, but they've been trying a couple new things here and there in terms of their setup, who they're running the power play through, how they're using the point is a little different, how they're trying to get net front opportunities. So I think that after a whole or 2/3 of the season of them not really, making any changes or significant changes to try and improve things, I think they're at least trying things now. And they did score 1 power play goal in this past game and had some really good chances on other power plays. So we'll see. I'm going to stay tuned here and see if they can make it better.
Obviously, Carter Hart has been suspended temporarily or indefinitely.
Right.
How is the team responding both on and off the ice to his absence right now?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of questions here because first off, Carter Hart is gone. The NHL took the cap hit off. So I think that kind of is behind them right now, right? As far as dealing with the kind of fallout from it, it's hard to say. I think they were definitely rattled, and I think that had an effect on the team, right before the All-Star break, and they were losing those couple of games. I think having the All-Star break, that week off, allowed everybody to reset and, allowed the team to say, okay, we're going to rally around Sam Ersson now. Sam Ersson also had to make those adjustments to being the number 1 goaltender and having that pressure. I think it was a struggle for him the first couple of games, but again, having that break. I mean, you look at the 2 games he's played since then, tremendous efforts on both fronts. The stats were so much better than it was right before the break. And getting Cal Peterson more involved sooner. He played the Saturday night game against Seattle, and you might have thought that Ersson would have played that game. But no, we got to get a second goaltender in the rotation more regularly and figure this out. So I think that things are improving on that front in terms of just moving on mentally. As far as what it means, in the longer term, I think that's what they do, is ride it out for the rest of the season with Ersson. And then Peterson, as long as he's doing okay, if they feel like they need to switch it out with Felix Sandstrom, who's with the Phantoms, maybe they do that and see if they want to keep either of those guys. Well, they have to with Peterson, but just seeing what they want to do. And then maybe in the off season, look to get a veteran goaltender as a backup to move forward into next season and just kind of go from there.
All right, we'll see how that ends up playing out. Trade deadline now, less than a month away. What do you think the Flyers are looking to do?
I think they're going to be smart about it and try to find the right deals. I think they'll take calls on pretty much anybody, but I think, the names that are out there are the names most likely to be traded. I think we're looking at Nick Seeler. We're looking at Sean Walker. We're looking at Scott Lawton to some degree. And depending on what they decide to do with the blue line, right now there's a little bit of that logjam that I was talking about. And so do they end up trading Zamula because they feel like they can't fit him in? Do they trade Mark Stahl to allow the space for Zamula to get in? I think there's a few different ways they could go with it, but they're going to make the right deal for the right price, because I think the Flyers, given how well they're doing, have the luxury of doing that. And they have a bunch of guys on 1-year deals that they can afford to let go at the end of the season. So I do think the Flyers are in a really strong position here overall.
And do you think there's a piece that they're looking to add?
No, absolutely not. I think this year is house money. And unless they're doing a player for player deal in one of these trades that makes sense for a young guy to be part of this rebuild moving forward, I don't think they'll be trading for somebody unless it's a player for player kind of deal.
All right. Rachel, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you and your co-host on social media?
Sure. We are at Locked On Flyers pretty much everywhere on social media. I'm at R. Miriam on Twitter. You can find my co-host, Russ Cohen, at Sportsology, anywhere you look on social media as well.
All right. Rachel, always a pleasure. See you on Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. We're past the halfway point in the NHL season. But regardless of where your team is in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Crosby, or McKinnon will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, hockey fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.